Okay, welcome to Office Hours, everyone. Here we are in July. Happy Independence Day to those of us in the US. Yeah, announcements. I think we declared 4.9 stable since the last meeting. I don't remember if I don't think we regenerated the the download repositories. I think we just declared it stable.
So are there like some new steps that we need to do for that?
Steps as they've always been, and it's like Teddy does stuff. I don't know. Teddy's not here. I'm not going to worry too much about it. I think 4.9.0 is stable, but I don't know if we've updated the download repositories. Okay. Any other announcements people have? Okay. Questions, issues, PRs people want to discuss? General intent here is quick things that people want to bring up that maybe don't merit a full agenda, especially community members that don't normally attend.
I guess Pafisid wanted to talk about the Chrome history table.
I would call that one a full agenda item.
Should we wait for a time when Puffysid is able to make it to kind of advocate for the other positions? Since I know mostly folks who are here right now, or I believe folks who are here right now are mostly opposed to it.
You know, that might also be true. I was having a conversation with someone else who wanted like an arbitrary read table. They opened a bug report, which I closed. And then he side channeled me because he was like, this would be really useful. And I was like, yeah. I feel like these things all kind of fall under the same rubric of like, where do we fall on privacy versus utility? And I don't know, there was this very long Slack thread where we roughly said, it's a balance.
I wanted to mention that extensions are a valuable option for me. One thing that we should improve is how do you embed your extensions inside the Osquery installer? And we can easily make a change on the CMake so that you can provide a configuration option to CMake when you regenerate the package to include whatever you want.
What how many people who distribute Osquery packages have the ability to regenerate them from CPAC versus just entirely roll their own versus something else? Like, so Collide is a vendor. We roll our own packages. As far as I know, Cisco distributes it inside their other stuff. I don't think they use the Osquery packages. Zach can correct me, but like Fleet rolls their own packages. Security Onion rolls their own packages. So I don't know, like how many people would actually reuse the CPAC stuff?
So what I imagine here is that on the repository, we also upload the package data with the silent binaries in it. And so the person who wants to embed the extensions doesn't really have to rebuild Osquery from scratch.
Well, they don't have to.
He just takes the package data and rerun the CPAC logic. Hopefully, they can keep the signature on the binaries.
I think what I'm trying to say is, so Collide, we make our own Osquery packages. We use the publicly distributed Osquery signed binaries. But like I don't use CPAC. I have my own packaging toolchain. I rip the binaries out, put them where I want them, and add other stuff, and then make a package out of it. And I wonder, like, of the people that are big enough to want to distribute their own extensions, how many of them want to reuse CPAC versus have their own packaging logic that they would use?
Well, I mean, I do essentially the same stuff, but I wonder if the people who need to be advocated for are the people who are like the ones going, I just need this functionality, but now you're telling me I have to build a whole new packaging system to get this functionality. Like, and because of that, like, it's a goal of mine to make Orbit be able to ship extensions and arbitrary configurations very easily. I've had my energy focused on other things. Like, we're pretty close to being able to do that. But nevertheless, I think doing it with the standard Osquery tooling, if that's reasonable, I think is great. But it's my full intention that Orbit is a complete drop-in replacement for Osquery and gives easy-to-use tooling.
I think some of what I'm hinting at is if someone... So I don't find CPAC easy to use, so I'm kind of questioning that there are people who could use CPAC more easily than they could use other packaging toolchains.
This would just be like the most basic functionality you could get. And it is an easy patch, it's not hard to implement this. And we can just list files in a directory and just embed them. So it will be super easy to use for a user. The aim here is not to like replace Orbit, for example. It is just to provide a super basic mean for a person that doesn't want to like rebuild a packaging system to actually deploy Osquery with an extension.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I wouldn't reject the PR or anything. I don't maintain that. So if you're happy with it, that's cool. I wonder what we'd actually see people use, and we don't know until we do it, I guess.
Like there's a person, we can say the name, for a company, we can say the name, who wants to use this capability. And hopefully they have already implemented part of it if they had the time. Otherwise, we can look at the requirements and help them out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing is, like, at least for macOS and Linux, packaging is pretty simple. Windows is a little bit squirrelier, so I feel like once you sort of know enough to know that you want a package, you're looking at like 10 PKG builder lines. It's a pretty small shell script, because like I think in no world would Osquery sign the packages that someone has shimmed in extensions to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest complications, I think, for packaging are cross-platform packaging and the signing steps.
Yep.
Which, by the way, for Orbit now, we can build Windows packages on anywhere that supports Docker, and we can build Mac packages besides for the notarization on anywhere that supports Docker, I think. Or maybe it's on Linux. I can't remember exactly, but we're getting, in theory, it could be anywhere that supports Docker. So we're getting towards being able to unify everything, at least by containers, but notarization may never be a solved issue there.
What are you doing for signing on macOS? What do you end up doing for signing on that?
Yeah, I guess the signing and notarization of the resulting PKG have to be done from macOS right now.
I have seen a Rust implementation of code signing for Apple. If you would like me to try and find that and send that to you.
Yeah, I would love to see that if you can find it.
Yeah, notarization has to go to Apple's servers, and they're changing the pipeline this year with some of the new tools that are coming out. There's a new process for notarization, but if there's a third-party implementation, that would be awesome.
Notarization, I think I haven't seen anything for, because that's fundamentally a submission to Apple. But code signing, I have seen re-implementations of.
Gotcha.
In theory, it seems like you ought to be able to like reverse engineer what the submission looks like to Apple and then make the same submission and do the same thing with the results. I mean, that seems like the part that should least require actually doing it from a Mac, except that that's what Apple has said is the one and only way. But if most of the work happens on their servers, like, then it should certainly be possible. Anyway, someone's going to have to put in the effort to get to that if someone needs it that eagerly. Maybe it will end up being me someday.
I mean, Zach knows, but maybe forgot. My stance has usually been that I want to do my packaging on the native platforms, so with native tools. So Collide does all the Mac builds on a Mac, the Windows builds on a Windows box, packaging at least. I don't know if it's right, but it seemed potentially less error prone when I came up with that idea.
I think it makes sense in the context of someone distributing Osquery for a SaaS application, where you can pre-generate packages and then distribute those after folks sign up or that sort of strategy. But if you need to be able to kind of dynamically generate packages with parameters that you didn't have access to prior, and you want to be able to do it from the server in a friendly way, then you end up in my position.
Yep. I mean, you know how we solve. Well, I guess the crowd doesn't. So part of how Collide solves this is we pre-gen all of our packages. So we basically have a list of tokens, and then we just pre-generate packages with single-use tokens. And Gone is kind of weird, if that's the one I think it is. It's mostly a giant wrapper around the Apple tools, and I found its Go code very hard to read. Other people may like it.
Gone is nice. I use that for the Orbit packaging on Mac OS, and it does help automate the whole process as part of the rest of the packaging.
It's fundamentally a wrapper.
But like Steph says, it's a wrapper. Yeah.
It's also a wrapper with a lot of code to basically wrap a single command line. So whether it's a win or not, kind of up to you. Could also see the launcher make file if you want the the simplest form. Okay, so some suggestion that maybe CPAC hooks would help, and Orbit, so I'm taking notes in the background as we go.
And going back to the Chrome history table, I believe Puffy doesn't have the time to join office hours on this specific time of day. So we will have to move the conversation on Slack, probably.
So I'm not sure how to have the conversation. I've seen several people talk about, so Puffy Sid has talked about the value of having a Chrome history items table for forensics purposes. Someone else has talked about the value of having an arbitrary file read table for general utility things. I think it is the fairly strong opinion of the TSC that we do not want to create tables that make it easy to accidentally expose private keys, certain classes of user information. And I don't see a lot of compromise space other than this is what extensions are for.
It's also possible to do Chrome history with ATC right now. That's pretty easy and was, to my understanding, at least half of what ATC was designed for. Because it's literally just a SQLite database. So as long as the Osquery D binary has full disk access permissions, you can get the Chrome history for any user. by constructing a fairly simple ATC table.
Yes, I agree. It does work.
Is this something we want to keep?
That's a different question. So I suspect we do want to keep the ATC tables because they're super handy for parsing stuff. I think there's an interesting question of what functionality would we want to revisit under the guise of maybe removing from a privacy perspective. The other example for this is like the curl table is something that we would probably never accept today because it makes an outbound network connection. But it's kind of baked in pretty deeply to how people use things. So I don't know if we'd keep it as an exception. I don't know. I feel like the best way to reason about that would be to kind of be like, okay, I propose we remove it in a blueprint and see what pushback we get.
Well, not really remove it, but make sure it cannot be used to open a Chrome profile.
Would you just like add a check for certain known file paths and then refuse to handle it?
Yeah, that, or we can also look at the tables that we have inside and use it to detect whether it is a profile or not.
Kind of funny because I find myself, I can't tell if I'm suffering from sort of like some pre-existing bias, but like I'm not against a site being able to read Chrome profiles. Like you want to ship an extension, cool. You want to ship an ATC configuration, cool. But I'm kind of against us making it like really easy and front and center. So I don't know that I feel the need to add a block to ATC. But I might just be biased by like because it pre-exists. So I don't know. I'm really curious what other people think.
Yeah, I think it looks weird that we are against an explicit table, but we still allow this with ATC.
I think that's I mean, there are different levels there, right? One is we are taking user data and, sort of baking in, giving our blessing, as it were, by making it a separate table that can be queried. It's a little bit more work and a little bit more kind of effort and knowledge to go construct an ATC table and push that down to an endpoint, as opposed to it just sort of being there passively in the background. I will say in incident investigation, the ability to carve Chrome history has been useful, such that it going away would be difficult or frustrating in some of the work, such that we might end up patching out the ATC checks again. Because there are controls in place to, before an ATC table or before an ATC query gets pushed down, right, to go through, it's only ever reactive, as opposed to something we're collecting, which baking it in as a table would, again, sort of be seen as giving our blessing on. There's a difference of degree and intent there.
I understand there are people using it, like every other feature. But I don't believe that the difficulty in setting this up matters, because you can just download the ATC configuration from GitHub if someone happens to share it. Removing this capability means that we can then talk about it and implement this in a better way, if that is something we want to implement. Like, instead of trying to return the Chrome history to the server, we can maybe with a delay search if there is a specific domain inside and just return a boolean and try to protect it somehow. Right now with ATC, I think it is just like having the table implemented. There's not much difference. It is not built in, but you can just download the configuration and it will just work.
How do you feel about the shell history table?
I believe that the shell history is kind of different. It is true that you can like open Chrome through the shell and provide a URL. But usually the kind of things you have in the shell history is less important privacy-wise compared to the Chrome history. And some people argue that you can still perform network monitoring, but I believe it is different compared to, like, when you try to monitor the network, you will still have HTTPS in place that will hide certain things. But that is not the case when you attempt to access the Chrome history directly. And that information is really important. You can use it to profile users directly. So, yeah, I mean, it is something we never spoke about, but I always thought about opening a blueprint to remove this capability. Like, it is weird that we do not allow this if it is in C++, but it is perfectly fine if we have a configuration setting.
Well, I don't know. I would look at it as a matter of intent. Like, the intent of ATC is not explicitly to expose browser history, although that may be one of the capabilities that it introduces. Whereas, you know, a table written in C++ that intentionally parses the browser history has a clear intent that is much closer to what we see as a privacy violation. So I think no matter what features exist in here, there's going to be at times blurry and at times obvious lines between things that are, you know, have privacy trade-off for the end user of the device. But I'd be hesitant to remove existing functionality from Osquery unless we're like really having a serious like philosophical revisiting of what Osquery's role is.
Like, I agree with the logic. If it is like, if we happen to implement a feature that exposes user data and it is a honest mistake, then I believe it is fine. But as soon as we know that we can potentially expose it, then Osquery is no longer privacy focused, because we know there's a way to get the data and we are not doing what we can to prevent it.
I think I don't take that stance. And I feel like I have a maybe slightly more nuanced stance, which is that we're an agent, and I think of us as an API shim, you know, between kind of arbitrary APIs. And there's a large number of places where you can probably extract some user data, and some of it may be more or less sensitive, and some of it may require shipping some kind of configuration. Aegeus is another one, for example. We don't ship a lot of Aegeus, but you could absolutely ship an arbitrary file read configuration through Aegeus. It would be very similar to shipping an ATC configuration. And I don't think that means we shouldn't ship Aegeus, and I don't think that means we shouldn't ship ATC, and I think intent matters, right? Like, fundamentally, we're shipping an agent that people can do stuff with. And I think trying to like redact the data that comes through is going to be highly error prone. So I would be very hesitant to try and create a, you know, profile redactor for ATC. I just don't think that would work.
Yeah,
so
I wouldn't remove ATC. I would just, as you mentioned, filter it out.
Yeah, I think that's technically hard, because I think there's like, it's a game of whack-a-mole, and I feel like our intent matters more, right? Like, what we have declared supporting and aiming at is a little bit different than, well, you can build this, but like, I don't know, maybe I'm being wishy-washy.
I'm thinking about the users that are using Osquery because it is supposed to not invade privacy. And I believe that we should either try to redact this data or make it clear that this data is available. in the documentation. Because many folks may not know about this.
Even if you took out, browser history, many people don't understand what you can read, and many people seem to have different views about the privacy of it. One of the things that surprises me continually is that Etsy hosts and ARP tables are things that people seem oddly sensitive about. I don't understand why people get huffy about their ARP tables, but they do. So
I believe that the ARP table is fine. It's going to be similar to DNS requests.
I can no, it won't. ARP tables is only local.
Yeah, I mean, what I mean is that you can only see the request, but not really any content of the communication. And this is the same for HTTPS. If we happen to access the Chrome profiles, we can see the keywords entered on Google, for example, while it is information that is not available with DNS monitoring.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my issue. I think we should either do our best to redact it or either make it clear in the documentation that there's a chance people can read this data.
I think it would
I have no opposition to clarifying the documentation. I'll say that.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way, and especially if you bring in the idea that local configuration can empower all kinds of things, right? Just saying we use Osquery does not tell you anything about what kinds of data may or may not be accessed.
Where does it stand, though, against the explicit table? Because I can see that the data is the same, or actually, maybe with ATC you can even get more data than you would in a controlled manner with a table, where we could fine-tune things and make sure we do not provide too much information from the profile. Because I mean, the outcome here is the same, whether you add a table or whether you keep using ATC. It doesn't really matter, in my opinion, how in the technical level it is happening.
I mean, would you expand the argument also to cover file carving?
File carving is something I don't know about yet.
Yeah, because the
Didn't think about it.
thing, you could request the SQL database that's the history to be carved and delivered, and you could just drop it into a database reader and get the data that way, right? It's all about matters of degree and intent, and what we are seen to support, right? The workflows and tools that we are seen to support by what we bake in at the table or other level.
The thing that I always ultimately come back to is if you have malicious admins, they could use whatever mechanism they use to push Osquery, to push any arbitrary program that does any arbitrary amount of privacy violations, such as keylogging or collecting up all the photos and sending them, or any of those things. They could get the browser history in those ways. And I think that for me, it seems like the best things that we can do are try to remain principled about what we think has the best value to the best, sort of forensic and operational value to privacy cost. And then also continue working, and this may not necessarily be as the Osquery project itself, but as the Osquery community, on tools that help administrators interact and communicate with their users about how that data is being accessed and what can be done and what will be done, which is I think something that I mentioned in the thread that we at Fleet are interested in these ideas of scope transparency and audit transparency. What is capable to do, what has actually been done on the device.
Collide's done some stuff around communicating to the end user. I don't know if people saw the blog post from us a bit ago. We now have a fairly extensive privacy center where you can see everything that's been pulled off of your device. You can get data, you can see sample queries. For things Collide does, you can see what the intent of them was.
Yeah, and I think I've seen as part of the honest security thing, like there's some operations you like try to get prior user consent.
We do that too. So there's this is not to advertise for Collide or anything, right? We do a couple of things. One of them is that for things that are deemed sensitive, which is a Collide judgment, we will reach out to the user first and be like, hey, someone's trying to do this. Is this cool? And the examples for that are things like location. So Collide has a couple of things that are like lost mode. So if you wanted to enable lost mode on a device, either through the MDM or through non-MDM means, that is considered a sensitive action and requires a positive hack from the user. And MDM remote wipe is the other one. So those are the two places we've sort of played with it as a framework. And then there's sort of a separate piece of that, which is understanding the queries that have been run and what data someone has access to. And we're sort of shoving that under the product name is the Privacy Center, but fundamentally it's a web page that shows you what's happened on your device.
Yeah, and I mean, I think these are interesting ideas, and there's space for organizations that integrate Osquery to provide more context to the end users of these devices about what the administrators of the devices may be using the system for.
Yeah. I think I agree with everything Zach is saying, and probably maybe what Eric says, but in my own words, I think the intent of what we do matters a lot. So that we happen to provide a rope that you can build something that we won't build ourselves doesn't feel hypocritical to me.
Yeah, I'm still not sure about it. I mean, the intent is the intent, but what matters is whether you can do something or not, which can be good or bad. And it seems to be bad if we compare it against the core guidelines we have. It is something that we explicitly not allow, but we are still allowing it with a trick on the configuration.
Where are our core guidelines? I don't think I've looked at them for a while.
I believe Teddy was going to.
There are a couple
write
of them. There are a couple of them in contributing, but in the sense of the privacy thing, we do not have them written down anywhere. They're definitely a little bit of a we'll know it when we see it kind of thing. Teddy did have a little framing of them in this giant Slack thread. Let me see if I can find it. If I can find what he said, I will convey it into our minutes. But I've kind of generally taken it a bit as the I'll know it when I see it. Okay, Teddy's assertion was browser history, email messages, caches, contact information. I would generally add private keys to that.
Yeah, I mean,
Which then raises the question of what about the user SSH keys table? Because that gets private keys.
No, it does not. It extracts fingerprints, but it does not extract key material.
Ah, interesting. The schema is a little unclear on the wording. It says returns the private keys.
We'll double check, but I don't believe we
No,
return private keys.
there's no actual material, like key material in there. And then so we don't consider browser extensions private material.
I mean, we could have a conversation.
Yeah, again, I'm just sort of like wondering where that leads, right? Like where the line is or isn't. And I certainly don't have a sense of that, which is why I'm asking.
I mean, do we, as folks involved in the Osquery community and as the technical steering committee, want to like classify tables by their potential privacy impact and then publicize that information some way so that Osquery end users, whether they're using a vendor who wants to play along with the story or not, can get some information about how what's being used on their device and how potentially privacy compromising that is?
I don't believe that's technically possible.
Well, best effort, we could at least provide some documentation about it. I know we would not able to use Osquery knowing that you can get it to access the Chrome history, for example. Knowing whether, like, there's no way to secure every possible table, but we should at least provide some indication of the kind of damage you can make to privacy when you install it and you give it access to someone else.
So the thing that I'm hung up on two things about trying to convey this information. One of them is that different people have very different attitudes about what is privacy sensitive. I mentioned ARP tables. ARP tables are not a thing I have ever considered to be particularly sensitive. They predominantly tell you the local network. But we have heard from several customers that they consider that absolutely the most private information that they could possibly imagine, and how could we ever even deem it was reasonable to collect ARP, local ARP table. So clearly there's some difference of opinion, and I don't know, it's not forensically valuable, so I think we just stopped collecting it. But that's one. And then you have this other thing where it's very hard for me to understand sort of the ramifications of how many tables can access how many things that may or may not be considered sort of privacy sensitive. A GS and ATC are maybe two very broad ones. Maybe not that much else has these very broad read things. plist, Windows registry. So I don't know if you're imagining some kind of documentation about these tables have potentially very broad access. Meh. And how you want to treat that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard problem, and I mean it's something that we can only do a limited amount of work with. There are tables that we know are relatively safe that can't really expose any sort of uniquely personal information. I mean, you're shrugging, but like the timetable, for example.
I'm shrugging. So I'm shrugging because one of Collide's customers has very different attitudes about what is overly sensitive and has disabled 90%. They basically custom built Osquery disabling all of the tables for some of their users. And we're like, okay, I don't know what value you're getting at this point, but sure. So I don't,
Well,
I think I'm in the I don't know how to balance what I think is reasonable versus sort of some lowest common denominator, because I don't think there's anything universal.
yeah, and I mean, here we are with people. I think we've not strayed much from the initial and perhaps undocumented vision of trying to know it when we see it and keep the balance between utility and privacy. But here we are with one community member advocating for further potentially privacy compromising features, and with another community member and TSC member, Alessandro, advocating for walking back some of the features that we already have there. So ultimately, we have to find a balance for what folks are comfortable with within the project. And I guess I would say, we've been talking about this for a long time at this point now. I'm not sure that we need to make any radical change at the moment in either direction. I'm definitely not convinced we need to make any change in either direction, particularly not radical, but I think it's an important conversation for us to kind of have open in the community and decide where we want to land with all of this. And maybe that's just to continue staying the course of what we've done, which again, I think is not bad, although it may not be the most ideal and may not meet all the needs of every organization, every person who might want to interact with this software.
I'll second that. I tried to take minutes on this. People want to review and fill in, please feel free. If people would like to move on, we have some other agenda items. Thank you for the time check, Zach. Okay, no one said anything, so I'm going to move on. I put this on our agenda, but I don't know if any of the right people are here. Someone, Sebastian on Slack, has been running into a bunch of Windows FIM issues, which may be related to issue 5848, which basically is like a footnote about sometimes Windows throws up some errors. I don't know if there are any Windows people who want to look at this. I don't see anyone who I know is a Windows person in the room, so I'll just mention it. Okay, Charvel, macOS app bundle PRs.
Yeah, so I have a couple of PRs up. Thanks for the review stuff. Teddy has also reviewed it. I think we just need consensus on
I feel
the
strongly
location.
that we should not create a .app in /opt. We should create a /opt OS query and put whatever we want under that, and it kind of doesn't matter a whole lot beyond that to me.
Okay. So that was like the one thing that came out of the review. The other thing was, do we want symlinks for Osquery AI and Osquery Cuddle in user local bin? Teddy suggested on macOS we can just add a path in its paths.directory. But maybe on Linux we should have that. I don't know. I think last time the consensus, if I remember correctly, was like people would expect Osquery AI to be in their path.
Yeah.
And we should preserve that. And the easiest way to do that is have a symlink to the actual Osquery D.
I don't have a strong feeling.
I believe so one of the issues here, I suppose, is the whole permissions on user local bin, homebrew, privilege escalation mix-up thing. But if you symlink Osquery D and the Osquery D in the app bundle is owned by root and has the correct permissions, I believe the symlink would also have the correct permissions and then not be modifiable.
No, you can always remove the symlink.
So on macOS, there's a /etc paths.directory where people can put paths. Like if you have VMware has a command line utility, it'll put a path to /application /VMware whatever. So we can do the same thing. So we are not even touching user local bin, and by default, we have Osquery AI in users' paths.
So I'd say there are probably similar mechanisms on Linux, but they're going to look like shell manipulations, right? There's probably etc profile.d. I don't know what else off the top of my head. I'm not actually sure we should monkey in there. Like, I feel like I want to talk to more Linux admins before I thought about whether we should drop a symlink or monkey something in Etsy, or just be like, it's an opt, you do what you want to do.
Okay, so these PRs mostly touch macOS, so I think whenever we have a consensus on Linux, I can open another one, and that one is fairly straightforward. Just have like CMake install prefix to be whatever.
I guess I think we have two things and three things that are getting blurred together.
So the two things do need to be blurred for this one.
Oh, that's okay. I want to talk about them differently.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. One thing is I think it's absolutely important that we change the install prefix from user local to opto Osquery. And I expect under opto Osquery there to be an opto Osquery bin that has, the expected binaries in it. And then I don't really know if there's like a lib or a share. I don't care much, right? But I expect an opto Osquery bin Osquery D and opto Osquery bin Osquery I to exist on any POSIX flavored platform. So that's kind of my baseline for if I thought about what we want for paths. And then for macOS, I also understand that we need to not just do it there, we need to dump everything in a .app. And I don't think I have any real opinions or Mac specific knowledge about whether it's better to have opt osquery.app or opt osquery share osquery.apt or like whatever. I don't think it matters a whole lot. I just think opt osquery bin is sort of like a command line expectation I have. And then the third one is whether we drop symlinks into Etsy or anything into user local. And I don't feel like I have any strong opinions about that either right now.
In the Etsy paths.d, we won't be doing symlinks at all then. We just will adding a path
whatever.
to /op/osquery.
Whatever. I don't have opinions about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing to do. That's what I'm saying. I don't know if we should do that or not.
Is there a viable solution on Linux for making sure it's in the path after installation by default?
You can drop stuff into a variety of shell directories, right? Like Etsy profiles.d is something that would be loaded into everyone's shell. So you could imagine dropping things that would say like append Osquery to the path on these shell things. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. I don't know what the expectations are. So some of why I'm saying we should move away from user local is not the weird homebrew pseudo security issue, but instead, I had a handful of conversations with users where they sort of, like a consistent thing I got was that their expectation is that vendor distributed software now should just use /opt in the Linux world, and user local is a little bit more oriented around like machine administrator and not vendor supplied. So there's just this mismatch there, which kind of makes sense. User local to me is like a 30-year-old thing for local site admins. So if I come from that perspective, I don't know what people's expectations are about path manipulations. Like if you installed an Osquery RPM that you downloaded from Osquery, would you expect it in your path? I have no idea. I don't know.
Sharvo, did you get the answer that you needed?
I think for macOS, yes. For Linux, I think I'll just open another PR and ping people who might be interested in it. The other way is we just don't do symlinks and update the documentation to like, hey, this is where Osquery lies. You'll just need to add it to your path or have an absolute whatever.
And I'm also fine like polling more of the community. Like we can see what else people want. Like my short list is things go in opto Osquery, and then beyond that, I'm like, I don't know.
Okay, so I think I can move forward on at least those two things, and I think that was the only thing I had.
There's one thing that we should actually figure out in 5.0, which is that we have not hit consensus on what the bundle ID is on macOS. Charvel and I created this as
We created a profile.
io.osquery.agent, which we can change. Teddy sometimes assumes that it's going to be osquery.osquery.osquery. Sorry, io.osquery.osquery. I don't know if other people want to weigh in on anything. Okay, I guess we can just keep going with what Charvel and I came up with, and if anyone objects, we'll change it everywhere.
I think I like io.osquery.agent because that makes
It's less
sense.
duplicative.
Yeah. And we
It's also
already
more
did that,
concise.
so we already have that in place. So
Okay, we have about 2 more minutes. Someone asked to know what the status of Windows certs for 5.0 are, and the answer is I'm still fighting with CAs. Sorry. Okay. Thank you all for the sprawling conversation about privacy trade-offs. Anyone want to mention anything else? Okay.
Hello, how's the office?
Thank you all for your time. I guess that's maybe it.
Thank you all.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.